Is G20 powerless to stop this war in Ukraine? Secy Singh, why don't you start off? Because India's position itself seems ambivalent at the moment. At one level, we are talking about ending an era of war, as the Prime Minister said to Vladimir Putin. But at the same time, we seem reluctant to call out the Russians and say this is a war. In fact, when there was a communique at the G20 meeting last week in Bangalore, we were not willing to fully criticize the Russians, preferring to use words like crisis or challenge. Is it time now to call the Russians and tell them this is enough, you're in a war which you must stop?
Look, Rajdeep, G20 is not the forum for ensuring security in the world. The forum for that is the UN Security Council. And if you have the P5 divided, you have two of them on one side, Russia and China, and the other three on the other side, then UN becomes dysfunctional. So UN Security Council is meant to maintain peace and security, and it just can't do its job because you've got permanent five fighting with each other and they have veto.
But you've got all these members, with due regard, sir, you've got all these members as part of G20. What stops the G20 from building some kind of a consensus, including with the Russians?
Correct. The G20's focus, as you know, it was born during the 2008 financial crisis. The focus was originally on economic issues. But now what has happened is that economic and security issues have got entangled. Because as very clearly, Ukraine war is impinging on food and energy prices. It's affecting supply lines. And on top of COVID, you've got further international commerce and trade affected by it. And therefore, it's true that you cannot but address the bear in the room, and which is the Ukraine war. But at the same time, how do you address it when the spring offensive have already begun? You got the Russians already starting the spring offensive, and the Ukrainians are waiting for the weapons, and the Europeans really gathering the tanks. How many Leopard tanks they can gather and quickly pass them on to Ukraine, which means the big powers in Europe are really waiting for the spring offensive. Well, how do wars end? Wars can only end in one of two ways. One is that there is a victor and there's the defeated. That is not possible. And the second is that both are fatigued. And that is also, that point has not been reached. So until the principal countries involved reach that point, I don't think G20 or India or anybody can tell them, what to do about it. Then they'll give you a lecture on how to deal with China, how to deal with Pakistan, how to deal with Kashmir. We say that's interference in internal affairs.
I've got a number of voices, so I'll try and get the initial comments a little crisper and shorter if possible. Richard Russo, there in Washington, what's your sense? Do you believe that a forum like G20 can at all put any pressure on the Russians? The Chinese are also part of it? Or do you believe at the end of the day, as we saw, as I said last week in Bangalore, it's becoming increasingly difficult to evolve a consensus? Even India seems reluctant to take on the Russians beyond a point, given the fact that we are beneficiaries of cheap oil and gas.
Very nominal. I think Ambassador Singh covered it very well. The fact that you had a statement that came fairly close at the finance ministers meeting, and India had sided with the rest of the world, you'd say maybe that's a nominal amount of pressure that Russia may be feeling, cornered by partners that had otherwise been supportive in other forums. But UN Security Council has blocked, the G7, as well as direct action by the United States and its partners, is really the only area of activity we're going to see direct support. But everybody's hoping that behind the scenes, India, still having a strong voice in Moscow, is able unilaterally or bilaterally with Russia to play a supportive role in trying to find, a peaceful path at some point in the future here. So G20, no. G7, to some extent. Bilaterally, India's got a powerful voice, and we hope they use it well.